Hi, so today I thought I'd make a video answering all of your questions about chinchillas as pets and my two chinchillas specifically, Nimbus and Nebula, because I've had them now for about 6 months I think, and I've not really made any chinchilla videos, so I wanted to try and start that, and I thought what better way than doing a Q&A so you guys can get to know them a bit better. So jumping straight in, the first question is, how hard is caring for them compared to rats? Now this answer I feel is going to be a little bit different for everyone that has experienced owning both rats and chinchillas, whether together or separately at different times. For me personally, a lot of the things I struggled with when it comes to rat care, like the cage cleaning, keeping on top of just how messy they are, everything got pretty sticky pretty quick. I would say they are a little bit easier in that regard. They still do poop a lot, pee a lot, but I do find that keeping on top of that aspect of care, I do find it easier. There is, of course, other aspects of chinchilla care which I've not really had to experience yet, that in those 6 months of owning rats, I probably would have had to experience at least once. Things like having a sick chinchilla or having to give a chinchilla medication. Not sure how I would handle those compared to rats, because rats I do find, and I think there is a question about this later on, probably a lot easier to just bundle up, give them medication if you have to, hide it in food and things. Not entirely sure how that would go with chinchillas, so there is definitely aspects of their care that I've not even had to touch on yet that I'm sure I'm going to struggle with. Do chinchillas actually pose a risk to rabbits, or has that idea changed? So it's actually flipped, it's the other way around. Rabbits pose quite a risk to chinchillas if you keep them in the same room. A lot of rabbits can carry something called Pasteurella, and that can be dormant in them. They cannot have any symptoms at all, be perfectly fine carrying that, but they can then pass that on to chinchillas, which then can be symptomatic and it can make them really sick. So for that reason, it's not recommended to house rabbits and chinchillas in the same room, just in case they are carrying that and they are carriers of Pasteurella. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend. I probably wouldn't even want to keep rabbits in the same airspace, to be honest, just to be safe. What treats do you give them and how often? So they can't have that many different types of treats. Compared to other pets that can eat a wide variety of different foods, they are quite limited on what they can have. This is the majority of their treats in these jars. There is a couple more things they can have as treats, but these are the main ones. So they've got things like different types of herbs and flowers. They've got dandelion roots, things like hibiscus, goji berries, bee pollen, oats. And some of these they can have more often than others, so things like the dandelion roots maybe like once a week. Other things like the goji berries they shouldn't have very often, so maybe like once a month with those. So yeah, they do have treats, they do get treats from me, but on a daily basis I mostly just use their like pellet nugget food to give them a treat if I want to, because they shouldn't be having them very often. They do also have some other treats in packets, like these ones from Tiny Fairy Pet Stop, and these are just a blend of safe ingredients for them, made to look like a cookie. So these ones are hibiscus and blue corn flower flavour. Can chinchillas live in groups, or should they only be kept in pairs? Yes, some people do choose to keep them as a group, and in the wild there would be in much larger family groups. I think the main reasons people don't choose to keep them in anything more than a pair is because they can be quite expensive. They also need a much larger setup, and if those chinchillas do fall out and need separating, you're going to need a lot more cages. So people tend to just keep them in pairs, although I do know a couple of people that have got groups of chinchillas in 3s or 4s, and it works perfectly fine. So it's not something that I would be against trying. But chinchillas, introducing them and bonding them to each other can be a bit of a nightmare. So I think a lot of people, when they have a pair that works, they don't want to ruin that. What is one unique thing about each of your chinchillas? So Nimbus is a pretty unique looking chinchilla. He just has this really like battered beaten look about him because he was at some point in his previous life when I didn't know him beaten up pretty badly by another chinchilla, and I didn't notice this at first because he has taken a while to let me get close to him. He's actually missing most of one of his fingers on one of his front feet, so yeah, his little front feet look a little different to other chinchillas. Nebula is just Nebula. I mean, everything about her is just extra. She's very vocal. Sometimes she's like shouting at things, barking at things that I have no idea what she's barking at. She was doing it, I'd say maybe an hour ago. There was nothing going on in here outside. She just sometimes barks for the sake of barking, so she's a very vocal chinchilla. How often do you clean their cage and what's your cleaning routine like? So I'll do a spot clean like this, picking up their poops maybe every day or every other day from places where they sit or in their dust bar. I might make a full video at some point showing you in depth how I clean their enclosure, but I just block them with this piece of metal that came with the enclosure in whatever section I'm not cleaning, just so they're not getting in the way, and then clean each section. And then I will do a deep clean where I take everything out, take all of the bedding out, give it a good proper like disinfect and clean, maybe once a week, sometimes a little bit longer, but because they don't have very much bedding in the base, compared to some other pets, it's a very thin layer of bedding. That does mean that it does need to be changed a lot more often, so that does involve taking out their thousands of willow sticks that they've pulled apart from a toy. But yeah, it does need cleaning a lot more often than, say, hamsters, for example, that have got a very deep absorbent layer of bedding. They don't have that, so it does mean cleaning them once a week, around about. Do they smell a lot? So I am someone that is quite used to having pets that do have an odour to them sometimes. I've had rats, I've had intact male mice, I've been to people's houses that have ferrets inside, and the smell of chinchillas is nowhere in comparison to any of those three. I'd say the only time I really smell them is when it's starting to come up to their cage needing to be cleaned. When you stick your head in there, it does have a slight smell to it, but nowhere near as bad as a male mouse smells all the time, or that natural like ferret smell that, not being offensive to any ferret owners out there, but as soon as you walk into someone's house that has ferrets, even if they're not in that room, you can tell they've got ferrets. So yeah, chinchillas, I'm pleasantly surprised, don't really have much of a smell unless you're like right next to the cage. I can't smell it outside of the room, downstairs, which is quite nice. I know they can't get too warm. Will this be a challenge with the other animals in the room? I wouldn't say so. I don't think this room is as warm as it was when I had multiple heat lamps and heat mats, when I had other reptiles and invertebrates and things. The only kind of heat source in here at the moment, besides like everyone's bodies in this room, is Orbit's heat lamp, which isn't too bad. So this room I do think is a little bit more warmer than the other rooms in the house naturally, just because of like the positioning and everything. But I never have this radiator on in here anyway, so hoping it's not going to be too warm. They do of course have an aircon, which they don't need at the moment going into winter. But yeah, it's not going to be too bad in here because I've only got one reptile now. There's not like a lot of things creating a heat source. But yeah, I think I will find a good balance between making sure the chinchillas don't get too hot, but also making sure my mice don't get too cold as well. Are they as heavy and dense as they look from someone who had only gerbils and rats? No, this is a really deceiving thing about them. They are like 80% fluff. If you were to like take all that fluff off, probably they would resemble something similar to a daegu or a gerbil. There's really not much to them. And the last time I had any of mine weighed, which is a bit of a challenge, Nebula, who was still under a year old at that point, she weighed exactly the same weight. Hello. That was very brave. She weighed exactly the same weight as my elderly 2-year-old rat at the time, who I think he was around 240 something grams. She was only a little bit more than that, so they are quite deceiving. They look big, they look like a small kitten size, but there's really nothing to them. Do they go through hay like guinea pigs and rabbits? I would say very slightly less. Definitely less than I was expecting. I was expecting to go through hay as much as I have with rabbits and guinea pigs in the past. I've had chinchillas now for 7 months, I think, and I'm only on my third 5 kilogram bag of Timothy hay, so I was definitely expecting to go through a bit more than that. But they do have hay all the time in their hay rack. I keep this filled up. They also get loose piles of hay as well, and I was expecting to go through like a bag a month maybe, but it's not been as much as I expected or I'm used to when it comes to rabbits and guinea pigs that go through so much hay. This question is a good one. It says, how often do you currently handle your chinchillas and how are they different from how you handle your rats and mice? The answer to this simply is 0. I do not handle them. I do not pick them up, simply because I can't do that without stressing them out at the moment. So I'm working on trying to work on like a mutual understanding that if I let you hop up onto my hand, then we can transport you places. But right now, if I was to pick them up for any reason, like going to the vets or trying to check them over, which does make doing that quite difficult, they absolutely freak out. So at the moment, I am not picking them up at all because it is just chaos. So yeah, the difference between how I handle them compared to rats and mice is that I simply just don't. With rats and mice, you can pretty much just grab them if you need to in an emergency, if you need to check them for whatever reason, if they get out and they're doing something they shouldn't do. They are okay to just grab and they handle that pretty well. Chinchillas, on the other hand, have a defense mechanism called a fur slip, which I knew about. I didn't realize I did it quite as easily as they do, where if you grab them in the wrong way in a panic or something, they just throw a bunch of their hair and lose their hair. So yeah, they are not easy to handle. Not as easy as some of the chinchillas you see on like TikTok or Instagram, where their people have got them like in silly positions with hats on and stuff. If I tried to do anything like that with my two, I think they would unalive me in my sleep. Could you talk about the bond between Nimbus and Nebula and how they behave towards each other? Yes, of course. So I would say 95% of the time they got on so well. I was really anticipating having a harder time bonding them and putting them together because everyone says how difficult it is. And there was moments where it was a little bit tricky, but they have made such a difference to each other's lives. They sit anywhere that's like a big enough shelf for both of them to sit on. They sit there huddled up, cuddling and sleeping together most of the day, which is so cute. The only like 5% of the time is Nebby is definitely the dominant one. She is very bossy and can push him around sometimes, and he just lets her do it. He is such a pushover, and I would say she is a little bit, I don't know if chinchillas can resource guard, but when it comes to like their pellets in the evening, she is definitely the first one to the food bowl and won't let him eat until she's finished. So I have had to give them 2 separate food bowls for their pellets just to make sure he can get some without her being really mean and pushy to him. But apart from that, the rest of the time they get on so well. What happened to the chinchillas is in the photo, do they like to fight each other? So my two don't fight, luckily, but Nimbus is a rescue and he came to me looking like this, so we don't really know much about his history or his age. He must have been housed with another chinchilla at some point. When he came into the rescue with other chinchillas, he was living by himself, so it must have been quite an old injury that another chinchilla at some point has attacked him, fought with him. He did have multiple injuries to his ears and his feet, so either like a really bad fight or fighting and not being separated. So yeah, he does have quite big chunks and rips and tears missing from his ears, but they are quite old injuries. They're not anything new within the past like year or so, because they've healed and they're the same colour as the rest of his skin. So yeah, he does look like he's been in a fight, bless him, but I can't imagine him being the one to start it because he is such a passive chinchilla. So at some point another chinchilla has attacked him, fought with him, which is really unfortunate, but it just makes him look a little bit special and a lot more unique than chinchillas that don't have ears, that look like they've had 10 different ear piercings all over the place. Any regrets so far concerning the chinchillas, like toys they don't use, any mistakes you might have made? In terms of like toys, I guess I regret not just buying things in bulk straight away, like bulk willow sticks, willow balls, apple sticks, just because they do go through them so quickly. I would spend like £3–4 on a single willow ball and it wouldn't even last a day, so that was just a complete waste of money. In terms of like regrets and mistakes of things that I've done, I really regret trying to handle them too much too soon, especially with Nebby. She is such a drama queen, and when I was bonding them, obviously I had to pick them up to put them into the carrier and move them in between cages and things, and I was just too confident that it would be fine. I could just pick them up, put them where they needed to be, and Nebby freaked out, she panicked, she kind of ran like up my shoulder, down my back, and I'm like 5'6". I didn't want her falling from that kind of height, so I had a hold of her like this, just trying to like get her back into the cage, and she has done the biggest fur slip ever. She looks awful, and this was months and months ago, so yeah, I regret that. Obviously it wasn't her fault, it wasn't really my fault, but yeah, I just wish that that hadn't happened because she had such a nice fluffy coat that is now having to regrow because I was an amateur, and instead of just like lifting the carrier up and letting her just like jump out, I thought it would be fine to pick her up, and she said otherwise. How necessary is aircon? None of my friends growing up used aircon for them in the UK and they seem to do fine, but obviously as adults we know there's a difference between surviving and thriving. Does it shorten the lifespan without it, or just affect the overall quality of life? So a couple of things with this. Yes, aircon is necessary depending on where you live. If you live in a very cold climate that doesn't ever really get above like 15–20 degrees Celsius, then you're probably not going to need aircon. But I would say in terms of the UK climate compared to like 20–30 years ago, not to go all like climate change on you, but we recently, a couple of years ago, had a summer that reached 40 degrees Celsius, which has just been unheard of before then. Temperatures are getting a little bit hotter in the summer, so that's the first thing. Maybe back then they weren't having as hot summers. Also, it really depends on the type of house you live in, especially because I'm in a new build house. They are very well insulated. But that means summers are an absolute hell. If it's 30 degrees outside, it's going to be at least 35 degrees in my house. So houses are different, climate is different in the UK. I also think back then we didn't know as much about chinchillas or small pet care in general, and people were just chancing it. Some chinchillas might be a bit more resilient and not die in hotter temperatures. Some, as soon as they go above 22, 25, 28, getting up there in hotter temperatures, some of them are going to overheat and die simply because they've just got too hot. So I wouldn't say it shortens their lifespan like over time, but it can shorten their lifespan in the fact that you can have a 2-year-old, 3-year-old chinchilla not have aircon, think it's fine. That room then gets to like 25–30 degrees Celsius, and they just get overheated and die. So yeah, just to make sure that doesn't happen, and also just to make sure they are comfortable and they do have a good quality of life. Imagine being a chinchilla and you've got the densest fur of any animal, and you're in a big fur coat, it's 30 degrees inside, and you can't do anything to help yourself. You can't move to a cooler area, you can't unzip your fur coat. Aircon does make them feel a lot better in hotter temperatures, so life-saving, but also just a lot more comfortable for them. But I think that's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching and sending all of your questions in. I don't think many of you subscribed have chinchillas as pets, so you're really curious about their care and just my chinchillas in general. I got so many more questions I didn't have time to answer, so I might film another one of these in the future. I'm fairly sure I've had the chinchillas on my back at some point, and Nimbus is getting very, very brave. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!